Words of Color is an innovative virtual event hosted by poets Derrick Weston Brown and Alan W.King. Presented by the Hurston-Wright Foundation, the event features the work of Black published writers presented as theatrical monologue performed by Black actors from the CFA Repertory Theatre. After performance of the work, hosts Brown and King engage the author in an interview to explore and discuss their work. Welcome to Words of Color.
Right, here we are again. Welcome to Words of Color. I'm Derrick Weston Brown.
And I'm Alan King.
Yes, indeed. So, hey, shout out to the Hurston-Wright Foundation for this amazing series. This is the second episode. Yes, indeed. And we are really excited because I believe we had Ramika Bingham-Risher last time. And this time we have not one, not two, but three amazing authors here this afternoon to join us for what's going to be a really cool evening. Most definitely. Alan, you got anything else to add?
I'm just excited to well, it's too bad that the authors are not going to have their cameras on while the while the actresses are acting, because I'm looking forward to seeing the expressions when they see their work, interpreted in different ways. But we can get into that in the questions. But I'm excited. It looks like, we had poetry last time. We've got fiction this time. So I'm really, really excited to pick their brains and also, ask some questions of the actresses as well. So
most definitely. All right. Well, before we get to the first part of asking some questions and such, we got to read the bio so we can let the people know who are our illustrious guests today. So let me get my professional voice on. Okay.
Well, all right. So I'll do the first one.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, go for it.
It's like a reunion of sorts. Really excited. So first bio reading is Dolen Perkins-Valdez. So she is the New York Times bestselling author of Wench, Bomb, and most recently Take My Hand. And Take My Hand was named the most anticipated book of 2022 at Newsweek, San Francisco Chronicle, Essence, NBC News, and elsewhere. It was an Indie Next and Library Reads pick for April 2022. And in 2017, HarperCollins released her first novel, Wench, as one of 8 Olive titles, limited edition modern classics that included books by Edward P. Jones, great company, Louise Erdrich, and Zora Neale Hurston. In 2013, Dolan wrote the introduction to a special edition of Solomon Northrop's 12 Years a Slave, published by Simon & Schuster. Became a New York Times bestseller. Dolan is the current chair of the board of the PEN/Faulkner Foundation and is associate professor in the literature department at American University in Washington, D.C. And Dolan and we met at Stone Coast. She was faculty. I was a student at the time. So great that we're coming full circle.
Yes, indeed. Oh, and so I'm going to do Keisha Bush, which is a bit of a reunion as well, because I believe we met at VONA, a really great summer writers retreat for writers of color. I want to say we were in either I think we did a residency together. So it's good to see Keisha Bush once again. Let me go ahead and jump into bio. Keisha Bush is the author of No Heaven for Good Boys, Random House, a New York Times editor's choice, and the forthcoming children's book, My Family Tree. She has a business degree from Bentley University and an MFA in fiction from the New School, where she was a Reggio Honors Teaching Fellow and recipient of an NSPE Dean Scholarship. She enters Harvard Divinity School this fall with a full tuition grant and living stipend, that's always good, to pursue a master's degree in religion and literature. She's received fellowships from the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council Workspace Residency, the Tyrone Guthrie Center in Ireland, the French, I can't even say, I'm not gonna mess it up, Moulin à Neuf, my bad, in France, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, Vermont Studio Center, and VONA. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Literary Hub, The Rumpus, Electric Lit, and Lions Roar magazine. She has taught English creative writing and literature at the New School, New Jersey City University, the Center for Fiction, and the Hurston-Wright Foundation.
And while you catch your breath, brother, I'm going to read
you,
Ravi's bio. So the third author is Ravi Howard. Ravi is the author of 2 novels, Like Trees Walking and Driving the King by HarperCollins. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, Atlanta, Best American Mystery and Suspense 2021, and Salon. He has recorded commentary for NPR's All Things Considered. Howard has received fellowships and awards from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, the Hurston-Wright Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. In addition to being selected as a finalist for the Hemingway Foundation PEN Award, Like Trees Walking won the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. Ravi's work has been reviewed by the New York Times, Publishers Weekly, the Washington Post, Elle, People, USA Today, and the Dallas Morning News. So these are just, introduction of the knuckles coming at folks this evening. So
I know that's right. All right. So I guess a quick question, because we have a few questions before we really get the show rolling. And I think one question that I have for all the authors, you all are amazing storytellers. And I talk about my students about oral tradition and passing on stories. And I wondered, can any of you speak on the first story that you either heard through oral tradition or read that really pushed you into the direction of telling stories? I feel like there's always maybe a spark or something that pushes people on to, ooh, I can do that. So I just wanted to know, what's the story?
Yeah, I see the gears turning.
I know. The writers, they're thinking about it. Think about this.
I could jump in real quick. It's good to see you, Derrick.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah, our Vona days back in 2013.
So long.
For me, the storytelling started, like so many people, started in my family. So I grew up with 4 generations, me, my mother, my grandmother, and my great grandmother, who was born in like 1893. And we have a very strong oral history or sort of tradition in our family. And my great grandmother's mother was a slave in South America on a sugarcane plantation, and she escaped. And so there's this really big story in our family about her escape from slavery. And then she met a British pirate who allowed, she got on his boat, so random. They sailed up to Central America and got married and had the first generation of children outside of slavery. And then as a reader, reading, saved me from a very tumultuous childhood. And so growing up with such strong storytelling in my family, along with understanding how story propels you forward, how it gives you hope, even sometimes in the darkest of times, I knew from very early on that I wanted to tell stories. But then I gave it up because we grew up very poor, and I was like, I need to make money. So I went to business school and then came full circle back to storytelling 12 years ago.
All right, welcome back and thank you.
Thank you.
So I don't want to repeat what Keisha just said, but I would say definitely, I'm from the South, from Memphis originally, and oral storytelling is where it all begins for a lot of Southerners. But in terms of something that I read, I didn't read a lot of Black literature in high school because I didn't really know that it existed, to be honest with you, in the way that I learned later in college. But when I was growing up, the things I did have access to, I did have a copy of The Color Purple by Alice Walker, which of course I knew because of the movie. And so, that was how you learned about something in those days. And I just remember Alice Walker always made it look so easy, but I just remember Celie's voice. It was like a voice I had never heard. It was a voice I knew. you know, and I just remember thinking to myself, you know, that's me, that's my people. And maybe I can do this and tell the story of my people. So that was to me an awakening point. And then I remember the second book I read by her was The Third Life of Grange Copeland, which was also a Southern novel that really changed my whole perspective on what fiction could do.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I think for me, probably, you know, likewise being from the South, I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. I think my parents told me a story about being students at Alabama State, going to a dance that was on the top floor of the Benmore Hotel. But when they were going to the elevator, my mom told me going on the elevator, Martin Luther King Jr. was getting off. And this was after he had moved to Atlanta, but I think that probably became pretty close to the way that I experience history and write historical fiction. Those things that would not appear in a biography, but what are those chance encounters that someone might have? So I think, you know, a lot of those kind of stories here and growing up about, you know, those things about just the daily lives of people who may or may not have been famous, or these kind of encounters became important. But yeah, so that was a good question. It's good for me to experience like that. And also just to say hello to, you know, Keisha and Dolan. Dolan and I were in a Hurston-Wright workshop a few years ago when we were, you know, starting out as writers. So it's nice to be able to kind of share this space again.
Mhm.
All right, full circle.
More than a few years.
Yeah, you know, maybe 10, you know.
So I'll throw this question out there. So I know you know, based on your bios, I'm sure everyone that's joining us know you from your literary lives. But what I'd be curious to know is, what would people be surprised to know about you? It could be based on, you know, some aspect of your literary life, or it could be something totally non-related. But, you know, what's something that your audience would be surprised to know? And again, I can hear the gears going.
That's a good question, man. Real good.
I'll say that if I weren't writing, I would be a jazz musician.
Ah, okay.
I was a musician growing up. I wasn't a jazz musician, but I was a musician, and I was actually very good at it. And I thought I wanted to be a professional musician, but like Keisha, I thought, oh, well, that's not going to pay me anything. I need to, you know, maybe go to law school. But I still, when I hear jazz music, I feel like a palpable sense of pain that I can't play it. Like I really feel like in another life, I was a musician. Like it's in my soul. So both of my kids are musicians, and you know, and we go to a lot of concerts and stuff like that. But I feel it in my soul. I'm like, definitely in another life, I feel like I was a musician.
Awesome. Yeah, while the gears go, Dolan, you're better than me. Like I played the saxophone. I was no good. As a matter of fact, when I was supposed to be practicing, I spent so much of my time posing with the saxophone, you know, trying to look like the dudes on the on the record sleeves. Maybe if I practiced as much as I posed, I probably would have
The
been good.
saxophone is actually the coolest instrument for sure. That and the guitar, I think.
Yep. Yep.
I can jump in. So the pandemic started in 2020. I don't include the pandemic in our lives. When I'm thinking about like time, I subtract 3 and I just go straight to like 2019. So for me, the pandemic didn't happen. It was one big lump. So one thing a lot of people don't know about me, but like people who are close to me would know, is the way I survived and supported my writing career is I was an Airbnb host in New York City. And, you know, I love numbers and science, and I'm kind of geeky in many ways. And I have this thing that I say, you know, I took two negatives and I made, you know, a positive out of it. So I was a subletter in an apartment on Madison Ave, like, you know, in East Harlem. And I rented out the 2 extra bedrooms, and, you know, over 8 years, easily made like a six-figure income, while also like babysitting, and eventually I started adjuncting. But the Airbnb and sort of this non-traditional hustle just gave me enough time to do residencies. That's why I have those residencies, because I could just pack my apartment with guests. At one point I was pimping out my living room as a crash spot. The living room made $1,000 on its own just in 1 month. But like, you know, my high seasons, I made like 6 to 10 grand a month while living in the other bedroom. So, you know, the full-time job or the teaching and trying to write really is crushing, and adjuncting is soul crushing. And I didn't start that until 2018. And when I did start adjuncting, along with everything else, my writing life kind of disappeared. So it's really hard to be a writer and not come from some kind of wealth, or someone else, you know, holding up the financial end. And Airbnb, I like to call myself the Airbnb queen. I mean,
you sound like it.
A little mini conglomerate of 2 bedrooms and a 3-bedroom apartment as a joke. But, you know, going non-traditional really gave me that time and space. And so when people are trying to figure out how to hang in there, you know, think outside the box. I like to tell folks, you know. I didn't look sexy for a really long time. People were like, you need to find yourself. I'm like, I found myself. I have my Airbnb business, you know, like, so I didn't look like the sexy writer to a lot of folks, but I was making it happen in a very quiet.
That's a TED talk right there. The writer grind and flipping it.
I'm in the wrong business.
Awesome. Well, my wife ain't gonna let me have people moving in different rooms in the house. That's awesome, though. Awesome.
I do have some advice, though. If you have a backyard, you'll buy a tiny house, build a cottage, and throw an Airbnb joint back there. Charge $100 to $120 a month, and literally bring in like 30 grand, 20 to 30 grand a year. It is a great passive supplemental income. You will be surprised. You don't need to be near a whole lot of tourism. If there's a hospital, if there's a university anywhere nearby, if there's hiking and mountains, like that's, people are looking for that. 30% of all tourism in the US is medical tourism. And people are looking for something that's better than a hotel. Just my little spiel, just to let y'all know.
I'm waiting on the TED Talk. All right, Ravi.
You know, for me, I think I probably imagine myself more, as a kid, I like to draw. So I kind of saw myself more as illustrator, graphic designer. So if you had asked me maybe during my childhood, if I was in publishing, I would, you know, see writing and photography being more likely the place I would end up. So, you know, if I go to a bookstore, that was a section I would always like to see. So I was really interested in Black artists and Black photographers. But you know, that interest never went away. So even when I teach, I try to, you know, at least a couple times in a workshop, show some photographs and some illustrations, just because, you know, like you all talking about, or Dolan talking about music, you know, what does it mean to kind of be in that space? Or like, you know, Keisha talking about how does one design a space, whatever you bring into some other aesthetic. And that was one of the things I think that was really helpful, because I didn't necessarily see myself as a writer, but I still brought everything else that I was interested in, and I saw how it kind of, you know, contributes to what I'm doing. So, yeah.
Awesome. And I think too, like I think it's always awesome, like when people come with like these non-traditional stories, like they didn't have that traditional path, they just did what they did, and at some point found themselves where they were. So, I think a lot of, the non-traditional route too also makes us creative, and solution finding, because we're so used to doing different things and pulling from different yeah, wells of inspiration. So it's awesome.
All right. Well, without further ado, we're going to start with the first presentation. I believe
So Aisha is reading Ravi's passage.
All right, from the good thief, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go.
For his final meal, all Thomas Elijah Raymond asked for was the cake, the one he remembered from Rachel's luncheonette in Phoenix City. Prison rules would not allow food brought in from outside, safety concerns. So if Rachel Walker said yes, she would have to come to Holman on the day of the execution and make it there. How to feel about such a thing? Reluctant, but somehow compelled. When the day arrived, the warden's assistant greeted Rachel and escorted her to the kitchen. She could now match a face to the familiar voice of the warden's secretary, a voice she heard so many times over the phone in the few weeks before. "Mrs. Walker, the warden will be here in just a minute. Can I get you anything in the meantime?" she asked. "No, thank you. I believe I'm fine." She wanted to sound more certain and to dismiss any worry on her behalf. She wanted to manage that on her own. As Francine disappeared through the swinging metal doors, Rachel watched her through round windows. Francine walked past the corrections officer stationed outside and made her way down the corridor. The sound of her heels on the concrete was muted by the thick steel doors that had by then stopped swinging. Rachel was alone now, in the newly constructed wing of Holman Prison. It was the biggest kitchen she had ever seen. The smell of her restaurant kitchen had always given her comfort, filling the room and holding the contents in proper order. It was not the smell of any particular dish, but instead the slow, thin layers built up over the years. There was always cinnamon near, even if it wasn't needed for a recipe. Bowls of it curled like scrolls used to write down histories. She wished she had brought some with her. This place smelled of bleach and ammonia. It whispered nothing. Stainless steel shelves lined the freshly painted walls. Ceiling lamps spread a dull glaze across the metal fixtures. Fluorescent bulbs gave a uniform pale, except for a single lamp that flickered. Blinking rays the color newspaper turns. A dozen parallel steel islands rose from the white tile floor, wrapped in thick blue plastic, pulled taut over narrow shelves and secured around the edges of the counters. Two adjacent counters had been uncovered and arranged for her use. Francine said that the new wing had been finished for just a few weeks. The men would arrive soon, and from the kitchen they would be fed. In the meantime, the warden had arranged for her to work here. According to his secretary, the warden thought the space would be ideal, out of the way, clean. Rachel had dressed for the warm autumn evenings. She was not prepared for the cold confines of the prison kitchen. It seemed the temperature was set for a space full of toiling and heat, so the cold air unchecked was too much. The place wasn't walk-in cold, but damn near, with air washing over her feet in waves, snaking around her ankles and running along the floor. She placed her purse on the counter and removed a black apron. Rachel's luncheonette, 35 years in the baking, in silver lettering. The silver blouse beneath her black suit matched the silver in her hair. This was how she dressed for the event she catered. She took pause when readying for this occasion. There was no proper dress for preparing a last meal. The prison kitchen was empty except for the ingredients. Francine had requested the list a week before. Shortening, sugar, molasses, salt, baking soda, and flour had been lined up in a perfect row, labels turned outward. Someone had seen fit, perhaps an eye for detail, but a nod toward normalcy in a place where there was little. Everything she needed was there for her, except the one ingredient she'd brought with her, vanilla syrup. She knew they had rules about bringing things in, but she prayed they could look the other way. The warden was killing a man, and he had made a show of this little bit of kindness, so certainly he could see fit to say yes. She took from her bag a bottle and set it down gingerly, the light tap of glass on metal, the care of it, almost like a beg your pardon for it being. In his letter, the warden had asked if she remembered the boy. How could she not remember? The boy couldn't have been more than 6 or so, because she remembered him sitting at the table with what looked like his grandparents, coloring the children's menu with the Crayolas she passed out in sardine cans. His family was on the way to Huntsville, the Space Center, they said, and he had lined up the salt and pepper shakers, the Louisiana Hot, and the Heinz bottle as rocket ships taking off from the tabletop. To get dessert, he had promised to finish the green beans, alone on the plate where the chicken had been, the wing and drumstick reduced to gristle and bone. He chewed with purpose, but not enjoyment, like he was practicing handwriting with his jaws. But the booth they chose was across from the cake display, so he did a bit of window shopping while he finished the last of them. He was still chewing as he stood by the glass. Rachel was on the other side, loading the shelf of red velvets. She remembers him studying his options. He didn't like the green beans one bit, but he kept his word and intended to make the most of it. He asked for the molasses cake, while his grandparents had red velvet and buttermilk pie. They thanked Rachel as they left, and then she looked away and didn't see the boy fall to the ground. A child on the floor hardly raised an alarm at first. Kids were prone to go from dilly-dallying to sprinting fast enough to stumble. And the tantrums. But something was wrong, because the boy's eyes widened as he searched for air. In the commotion, his people thought he was choking, but no obstruction. He held his mouth wide, searching for air. Rachel got to the boy first, the allergy syrup from the first aid kit in hand. He coughed up the first dose, but she gave him more while his grandmother rocked him, his grandfather fanning with a napkin. By then, the boy's search for air eased, and the gentle wheeze faded enough to tell them all the air was back. When he breathed a bit more, deep, full breaths, he cried some and looked around. He never lost consciousness, but his eyes looked beyond them, seeing nothing until he returned to himself. Then he looked at them, Rachel, his grandparents, and it seemed he had to lock eyes on everyone gathered around him to fully return to the world. And then it was over, the scare behind them. Rachel was always careful of nuts and things, warning of the common allergies, but the reaction to molasses seemed a rare occurrence. People like to sue over such things, but these folks sent her a letter of thanks. She would find out later that the grandparents were guardians, new to his care, and they didn't know his condition. She wondered then about his parents, what tragedy or rift had brought him to the care of his elders, kin, but estranged. It was a blessing to discover his condition in caring company. Beneath the cursive of the grown-up handwriting, the boy signed his name, Jojo. In what she read about him during his trial, his grandparents had died. He made his money as a day laborer, and Joseph killed a man who refused to pay him. He went through his pockets for the money owed. Murder in the commission of a robbery. There would be no clemency. As part of the death warrant, the state of Alabama would use 3 chemicals for his lethal injection. After the first drug, he would lose consciousness. The second would shut down his muscles. The third would stop his heart. What Rachel carried in her bottle would do the same, answering the young man's request for a final and private mercy. All he asked for was the cake, like the one that showed him what his body could not take, what in the right dose might knock him unconscious or even kill him. Molasses that had stopped his breathing once, but he was a boy then. She knew it wouldn't be enough for a man, so she turned to her garden. She had years ago planted a small plot of cassava in her greenhouse and used it for her baking. The lined skin of the cassava felt as rugged as cypress knees, but the flesh, handled carefully, was a wonder to be fried or roasted or used in her baking. She took the time to learn how to prepare it safely. Cassava carried its poison in the coarse skin and the leaves, the parts exposed to the world. And perhaps that was how it should be, a shield to survive in a certain kind of world, to thrive even. To carry out Jojo's request, she saved what was meant to be discarded. The cyanide in the pot liquor thickened with the starch of the root. During his trial, Joseph Elijah Dixon had been shuttled back and forth from the new county jail to the new courthouse. Depending on the road they took, he may have passed the hillside where Russell County did their lynching. Out on a hill they named Golgotha. The name confused Rachel when she heard these stories as a child. The killers tried to sanctify their work, but it was nothing more than blasphemy. She knew that hilltop from the Easter hymns, New Testament scriptures, and the Sunday school books. 3 crosses, the bad thief cursed it all, and the good thief asked for grace and mercy. Joseph had asked her for the same, and she brought his grace and his mercy, and it floated there in the thick sweetness of her bottle, a dose large enough to claim his body. He would die that evening, but she wouldn't let them make a carnival of him. The spectators would have nothing to witness, because he could do his dying, make his peace in private. She turned the dial on the oven to 350. The perishables she retrieved from the refrigerator. The others she opened, poured, and measured. The pans, greased and floured, lay waiting for the batter. When the time came, she turned on the mixer and listened to its baritone hum as it folded the necessary things, one into the other. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh man. Okay. Yeah, I'm at a loss. I think if I had a question before we move on to the next reading, and we should have Q&A at the end, time permitting. But as always, I always ask, how does it feel to hear your stories read in another person's voice? What do you hear that's familiar? What are some things that sound almost something that you didn't expect? I guess that's what I'm just wondering. Like, what was that like to hear your story?
First of all, thank you to Aisha. Really appreciate hearing that. I just think, when you're writing, you try to imagine inflection. So it's beautiful to hear how someone who acts, especially someone who's reading multiple voices, is able to find those moments of inflection. Especially after hearing the conversation about music earlier, kind of like the space between the notes, kind of the space between the words. So how punctuation, we can't see it, but how it becomes just almost like a note. So I really appreciate the way that Aisha presented that. So yeah, it's amazing to kind of hear it kind of come back at you, both the dialogue and the narration, just to, kind of hear the story kind of bounce off the walls. Yeah.
And I'll just ask this real quick, and I'll be asking the other authors this too, but when you're working on the manuscript, you have in mind what the finished product is going to be. It's going to be bound and people are going to read it. So now with watching somebody or listening to someone read your work, does that help you envision like other possibilities for the story, other spaces where the story and those characters live?
I think it really does, because so much you're trying to do with the unspoken, and so the inflection kind of helps to open that up. Like, what are those moments of dialogue where no one is going to say them explicitly, but those things that characters kind of hold. So that difference between what we choose to narrate and what we choose to put in dialogue becomes important when you can hear like a hesitation in a voice, or candor anything that's kind of, people avoid a subject to go right through it. So I think those are really helpful lessons in determining how you shape a voice, both a voice and a narrator. So what they're saying and what they're kind of holding back.
Okay, cool.
All right.
So I want to thank Aisha again, and I think we're going to go into Asha, who's going to read No Heaven for Good Boys by Keisha Bush.
A melange of orange, yellow, and purple hues reflect off of big cumulus clouds as the sun rests on the horizon. The small crab Ibrahima has been toying with turns to him, its claws set to attack. He calls out to Musa to come see, but gets no response. He looks up. His friend is nowhere in sight. When he looks back down, the crab is gone. He could hear them all talking just a while ago off in the distance. But all that fills his ears now is the incoming tide. He stands up to see if Musa is crouching down somewhere, but the beach is empty. The path in front of the rocks and the dune he had crossed earlier is now completely swallowed up by the sea. He is the only one there. Musa? Nothing. Aisha? Silence. Fatu, Binta? The tide is coming in fast. He looks up at the sky and frowns. His body begins to sweat even as the cool ocean breeze washes over him. Being on the beach at night brings bad luck, and it's getting dark. The beach is the only place evil spirits can sneak onto land without being seen. They can walk right along beside you without even knowing it, his father once told him. Ibrahima looks to his left. The dune looms high above him. He looks to his right. The coast stretches on far what seems like eternity. If he goes in that direction, he would be walking further away from his village. And he's never been down that end of the beach before. In front of him lies that rocky wall that encases the coast. The tide slaps at the back of his ankles. He walks forward and tries to climb the dune, but his feet sink into the soft sand and he slides down the steep incline. Trying again, he drops down to his knees in an attempt to crawl. He ends up face down, clutching handfuls of soft earth. He lies sprawled out on his stomach in defeat. What are you doing? A voice rings through the noise of the crashing waves. Ibrahima rolls over to find a man standing behind him. He had just looked down the coast and hadn't seen anyone before. Didn't you hear me? The man shifts his weight. Answer up, boy. Ibrahima stands and looks up at the man wearing a black bubu on his head wrapped in a matching turban. I'm trying to get back home. Where do you live? Ibrahima points toward the dune. Come with me. I'll show you the way back. The man turns his head down the coast, away from his village. Ibrahima doesn't move. He doesn't trust the stranger. If you stay here, the tide will gobble you up and you'll live out the rest of your life as a fish running from the fisherman who wants to eat you. The swelling tide, angry and aggressive, crashes against Ibrahima's legs. He looks towards the dune one more time, hoping to see Musa or his sisters, but he knows they are gone. So then he turns and follows the man down the beach. What's your name? The man asks. Ibrahima. How old are you? 6. Ibrahima holds his hands up, fingers widespread. That's a good age. They walk for what feels like a long time before reaching a set of deteriorating cement steps leading to the top of the cliff. Be careful, the stranger says, standing aside for Ibrahima to ascend first. Ibrahima uses both hands to climb the tall stairs, relieved to see the crest of the roofs in the distance. The two of them walk toward the unfamiliar small village of quiet, tin-roofed shanties to the main room. I'm sure your family must be worried about you by now. Let's find a taxi to get you back faster. Huh? The man hails a horse-drawn wagon. He lifts Ibrahima onto his back and then hoists him up. Ibrahima's body bounces to the rhythm of the horse trotting across the dirt road. The smell of the manure lingering from the day's errands. Hay scratches at the back of his legs. He looks up at the man, with the evening settling in him. He can only make out the silhouette of his face. His eyelids hang heavy, but are shocked open. But his eyelids hang heavy, but are shocked open with every rock the wagon stumbles over. Ibrahima jumps to attention at the sight of the mosque his family attends. I live here. The man shouts to the driver to stop. Once his feet are planted firmly back on the ground, Ibrahima runs down the sandy path all the way to his house. Barreling through the door, he's greeted by a chorus of relieved voices. Ibrahima, Alamahaduluha, my baby, where have you been? His mother exclaims. Where did you run off to? His sister asks over another. We thought you were with us, Musa said. You were together, and then when he looked up, you were gone. Don't do that again. Well, the water got really high. I couldn't get to you, Ibrahima says, on the verge of tears. Fatu, don't yell at your brother. You should have kept a closer look on him. The one thing I asked you to do, just one thing, watch your brother. But Mama, I was watching him, Fatu says with a pout. Maimuna rushes over to Ibrahima and scoops him up into her arms. Before he can respond, Binta wraps her arms around him and their mother. Aisha joins in, roping in begrudging Fatu. I was so frightened. I thought you had drowned. Binta explains, ever the drama queen. Don't talk like that, Binta, Mamuma says. Idrissa walks into the house. Then, and his face lights up at the scene before him. The stranger from the beach trails behind. Ibrahima, Papa, Ibrahima says, reaching out to his father from the hive of women enveloping him. That's who brings me home, Ibrahima says, pointing to the man behind his father. Your father was searching all over for you. My baby, Mamuma says. Well, we have this gentleman to thank, Idrissa says. Oh, monsieur, thank you. We owe you everything. We owe you everything we have for bringing our son back to us. Please join us for dinner. It's the least we can do. Fatu, my love, get our guests something to drink, quick. Fatu sighs and exits the room. Mamuma sits Ibrahima down, and the family ushers the stranger into the living room, offering him the best chair in the room. Fatu brings a cup of bisap and sets it on the coffee table in front of their guest, chastened. Ibrahima, my baby, come to Mama so we can get you into some clean clothes before dinner. My kind sir, what is your name? Ibrahima asks as Mamuna leads Ibrahima back by the hand to bathe. Ibrahima looks up at the stranger in the light as he passes. The man's face is greasy, with sweat to his eyes cloudy and dull. Marabut Ahmed, he says with a quiet smile. Ibrahima follows his mother out of the living room. An hour later, his plate cleared of any remnants and of grilled mutton or the bed of fried onions and petit pois that is set within. Mara, about Ahmed, wipes his mouth with the white cloth napkin. Dinner was nech. Mamuma smiles at the compliment. It is the least we can do after all that you've done for our family. She rises to prepare the children for bed. I should get going, Ahmed says, standing. Well, where are you staying? Idrissa asks. I'm a guest at the Ndaye family. I'm here for a few days. Well, please let me know if there's anything I can do for you while you're here. My family is at your disposal. Ahmed smiles as Idrissa walks him to the door. Before stepping into the night, he spins on his heels. Actually, There is something I would like to request of you. Ahmed says, oh, what is that? I have a da'ara in Dakar, and I'd like Ibrahima to return with me. We talked the whole way back from the beach. He'd make a perfect student. His cousin is a student in my da'ara. Ibrahima is just the kind of disciple I'm looking for. I believe our meeting was Allah's will. Or perhaps my brother's will, Idrissa says, looking at the empty doorway that held the silhouette of his wife just a moment ago.
Okay, thank you, Asha.
Thank you very much.
Keisha.
Yes.
So thoughts, like what, yeah, just repeat it. How does it feel?
You know, I lived in Senegal in West Africa for 4 years. And then when I came back, I wasn't a writer at the time. I came back and I wrote No Heaven for Good Boys. These children, Talibe, that Ibrahima is, they were, really fill, and still do fill my heart space. But I always forget that there were 4 languages in the book. I mean, I understand I wrote the book, right? And I remember when I came back from Senegal, like, moving, sometimes wanting to respond in either Arabic or French, or even Wolof, like nech, then it was nechna, which is like delicious. And another favorite word of mine is bachna, right? Which is Wolof, which also means good, but you wouldn't use that for food, And so I often forget that like an American audience is like, what is all this that's going on in the book? And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. Because it's just, as an American, as an Anglophone, we constantly mixed English, French, Wolof, and Arabic on a regular basis. And my Senegalese friends were cool with it, but you come back and folks are just like, wait a second, what are you talking about? But it feels great to hear different people's interpretation of the story. The characters are very alive for me. They feel like individual, real people in my life, and I love them immensely. And so it's really fascinating to hear other interpretations of the work.
Awesome.
Thank you, Keisha.
So we're gonna rush you with questions later on, but thank you again to Asha and thank you, Keisha. So let's see, next up we have Camille, who's gonna read a passage from Take My Hand by Dolen Perkins-Valdez.
Sybil, we need to talk. About what? He leaned against the counter. You know about what. What's there to talk about? I folded my arms across my chest. He unhooked my hand and pulled me over to him. Have you told anybody? Have you? No. Good, because there's nothing to tell. That's not true, and you know it. I don't want to talk about this right now. I pulled away and yanked open the drawer. The silverware clattered. All right, suit yourself. He backed off, but was still looking at me seriously. You know you can talk to me about other stuff too. Yeah, like what? Like Alicia told me how shaken up you were about giving a shot to those kids. She told you that? For someone agonizing over keeping her mama's secret, Alicia sure did have a big mouth. Yeah, those drugs y'all using? Civil, they're not safe. You mean the Depo-Provera? Yes. We don't know enough about that drug. It could be harming all your patients, let alone those little girls. What do you, of all people, know about birth control? You never act like you knew anything about it. Every time I looked into Ty's face, I wondered if our baby would have resembled him. If it would have been a boy or a girl. If he would have made a good father. That's not fair, and you know it. Besides, I thought you didn't want to talk about it. I don't. Listen. I found out that Depot hasn't been approved by the Food and Drug Administration, he said. That's not true, I said defensively. It is true. How do you know? I looked it up and I read about it. You don't read. You don't know what I do. He took the forks from me and set them down on the counter. Civil, I'm not that little boy who used to tie your shoelaces together. I'm a man. I know that. Well, then stop talking to me like that. Ty just didn't understand. I wanted so badly to reach for him, to hold him, but I couldn't bring myself to cross that bridge. The hurt was still too fresh. Alicia already told you the teenage pregnancy rate in Montgomery. We can't turn our backs on the problem and pretend it doesn't exist. I shook the spoon, the pudding landing in the bowl like a cloud. I could tell the pudding had been in the refrigerator overnight because the cookies had softened. Ty scooted a clean bowl toward me. Think about it, Civ. What if those drugs are doing more harm than good? I couldn't believe Alicia hadn't mentioned to me they were looking into this. If she and Ty had talked about Depot not being safe, then weeks had passed by without her so much as bringing it up. I tried to hide my embarrassment that I did not know it hadn't been approved by the government. That was news to me. There's nothing that says it's harmful. Some of the patients at the clinic have been getting shots for years. If there had been side effects, we would have known about it. I remember that Erica had told me she bled every day. It was normal, according to the materials, to experience some irregular bleeding. But bleeding every day? Was it heavy? Was she cramping too? I hadn't even asked. As her nurse, I should have asked more questions. You don't know the long-term effects, he said. It's not that complicated a drug. It just suppresses ovulation so that, since when are you a pharmaceutical expert? Depo-Provera is not that complicated, Ty. I spooned extra pudding into all 5 bowls so that we wouldn't have to come back into the kitchen for seconds. Then I followed him through the swinging door. Mr. Ralsei's cigarette smoke filled the dining room and someone had turned on the radio. WRMA played gospel on Sundays and somebody with a voice was singing Just Another Day. I knew the song well, but at that moment I could barely hear the words. I was trying to digest what Ty had just told me. What are you two over there whispering about? Ty placed the pudding on the table. You, Alicia said, and Mrs. Ralsei laughed. I sank into a chair. Mrs. Ralsei spooned pudding into her mouth. Civil, did Ty tell you he was the graduation speaker for his class? No, ma'am. In the course of the speech, he tried to be respectful to the college president, Dr. Barnes, but he kept calling the man Dr. Bailey. At first, we didn't know who he was talking about. We figured he was talking about some professor, but then, she chuckled. Ty calls the man up to the podium. He turns around in this serious voice and says, Dr. Bailey, I want to present this gift to you in appreciation of everything you've done for our class this year. And by this time, you can hear the whispering in the crowd. Everybody was about to burst out laughing, but Dr. Barnes didn't seem to mind that the name was wrong. You best believe he came right up to that podium and took that gold pen Ty handed him. Huh, I said. Mrs. Ralsei, this banana pudding sure is good, Alicia said. Tastes like my grandma's pudding. Thank you, Alicia. The pudding tasted bland on my tongue. I looked over at Alicia. She and I hadn't discussed the Williams girl since I first confided in her at the diner, and now she'd been running around with Ty behind my back doing some kind of investigation. Mrs. Ralsei? I turned to Ty's mama. Do you know anything about the drug Depo-Provera? Depot what, baby? Depo-Provera. It's the birth control drug we give to some of the patients at the clinic. An injection that suppresses ovulation for 3 months. Nope, I can't say I've heard of it. Why? I was just telling Civil that I read up on it, Ty interjected, and I discussed it with one of my old professors. His brother works in Washington, D.C. for the federal government. They're still doing trials on that drug. I don't think it's safe, but they're using it over at the clinic. If it weren't safe, Ty, they wouldn't be interjecting people with it. Mrs. Ralsei placed 2 elbows on the table. Unless you're poor and black. You know how they did those men at Tuskegee. Mrs. Ralsei's face turned serious. All of us had been stunned by the revelations about the experiments on men at Tuskegee. Even though the study went on for 40 years, none of us knew anything about it before the summer of 1972. It was unthinkable to us that they left hundreds of men untreated, letting them die long after penicillin was available. Ty, what are you saying? Mrs. Ralsei asked. Mr. Ralsei appeared in the archway that separated the living and dining rooms, a stub of a cigarette dangling from his fingers. What's this? Ty's saying that the birth control drug they're using over at the family planning clinic is dangerous, his wife answered. The clinical studies suggest it causes cancer, Ty said. In humans? His father asked. Mice, monkeys. The studies began 5 years ago, and the FDA rejected its approval. Well, it's not unheard of for unapproved drugs to be prescribed for certain uses. Civil, are your patients aware of the risks of the drug? Mrs. Rousey looked at me. I think so. I guess. Are they given something to read and sign about the risks and side effects? I tried to think of the women who had been given their first shots since I started. Yes, we had given them documents to sign, but Mrs. Seeger had coached us to summarize the document. Just standard language, nothing alarming. The women I'd seen had not actually read the document. They'd only listened to me speak, trusted that I'd correctly translated the block of letters on the page. Even the literate ones didn't read the forms before signing. Well, I've been thinking, Alicia said slowly. Even if the drug does cause cancer, it doesn't overtake our concerns right now. It would take a long time for cancer to show up. That's far off in the future, but a baby could happen any day now. That was probably why Alicia hadn't mentioned it to me. She thought pregnancy was a more pressing concern and was convinced we were still doing important work. Alicia, that argument doesn't make sense. Ty shook his head. You can't have a baby if you're dead. Mr. Rousey, who had been listening quietly, spoke. Ty's right. If it's true that these drugs carry serious risk, then you are essentially experimenting on those women the same way they experimented on those men in Macon County. Not just women. Girls. I swallowed. I had tried to forget that I'd given India Williams a shot, hoped that it would just pass quietly through her system until it wore off. Then I'd tried to get them into an apartment to make up for my mistake. But cancer? Ty had to be wrong. Maybe they had altered the medication into a better formula since that study. The clinical studies were on animals, not humans. Majoring in biology didn't mean Ty knew everything. Mrs. Seeger had years of experience. She was strict with us nurses, but she would never intentionally harm her patients. She was there to help, just like all of us. All we had to do was talk to her and clear up this misunderstanding. I'll wash up the dishes, Mrs. Rousey. I collected the plates, my mind already occupied by how I was going to gather the nerve to ask Mrs. Seeger about this. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Camille. Ooh. All right, Dolan.
Yeah.
Thank you, Camille. That was a wonderful reading. I really enjoyed listening to her.
You're welcome.
So yeah, in the words of, well, no, I'm not even going to use that. I was going to say in the words of D'Angelo, how does it feel? But that the context is off.
We know what you mean. We know.
Yeah. It is a strange feeling to hear somebody read your work. It feels like it's not even my work. It feels like it's somebody else's. I'm listening and I hear things I never even heard before. So it's really a strange, I don't know how playwrights feel when they hear a reading of their work, but yeah, I loved it.
Okay. Ooh. Well, I know we've got some time for questions in the room. If there's anyone that has a question, you could most definitely, I can give you a chance, put it in the chat and we could read it, or yep, we can jump in right here because I'm sure you've got questions for the authors. So please, or compliments and comments as well. I think that
we got some comments. I'll just read real quick, while folks are coming up with their questions. So we've got Regina saying excellent. We got the hands going from Ravi and Keisha, and love that support. And then also Khadijah saying excellent reading. So awesome. So
all right, we see wonderful pieces and readings. Thank you for sharing. All right, so we've got all the love coming up from the chat. It's awesome. All right, any questions? Anybody got any burning questions right now for for our authors at this moment. Here we go. Khadija Ali Coleman says, Dolan, what motivated you to write your book?
I was shocked the book hadn't been written before, to be honest with you. Sometimes you walk into something and you do it because you have to. So that's kind of how I felt. I had to write this book. It had to be, it didn't have to be me, but it had to be written, is what I felt.
Okay. Let's see. The next question, I have a question for the readers. It's from Keisha. What is your process to approaching new work? That's a great question. I want to know.
I definitely read it a couple of times through, and then I just try to understand who all of these different characters are and what their relationship is to each other. And I was like, okay, obviously, Sybil and Ty had a past romantic history, so what might that be? Who is Alicia to Sybil? And just try to understand who these characters are.
Awesome.
I also read it through like multiple different times, and then I do a lot of annotating on work, in the different characters, the voices, what I sort of create like backstories as well. And so for Keisha's piece, being someone who is also from like another country and like also understanding the whole thing with siblings and this like you were not where you were supposed to be, that like really resonated with me, right? Because it's like first of all, you go home without your sibling, it's a problem, and then when you are the one that's missing that goes home, it's really a problem, right? And so I usually look for those sort of like similarities as well to get an understanding of where each person in the story may be coming from. Like, I'm not a mom, but I can understand the relief of a mother, like when your child comes home, because if your child is missing, that's a problem, right? And so like those are like the different aspects of it for me.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we got a question. Did
Aisha, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say similar to what Camille and Ash already said. I read through the piece a lot and definitely just try to research anything that I don't understand that's going on. I really enjoyed Ravi's piece and just sort of looking into the location of Phoenix City and all of these places, having not been previously familiar, but yeah, I read through it a couple times and even read through it for friends and kind of get a little bit more of a feel, especially as it's narrative, just sort of getting a little bit of a feel of like the pacing and everything like that. But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Rafika Mustafa has a question. The readers did a great job of demonstrating different characters' voices. Can the author speak about how they determine what different characters should sound like through the dialogue? Good question.
You know, I guess for me, one thing I try to determine is, you know, because this was even a prison, it was a workplace for certain characters, so it was very much part of their routine. So what is your almost autopilot voice that someone is in? And in the longer version of the story there, you know, the warden comes in, but also just the warden's assistant, the idea of that kind of professional decorum that she shows, and when the characters kind of break out of that because maybe the emotions are so intense that you cannot maintain that. So what is maybe the outer shell of the voice that one has to use, and when does that kind of fall away that we get something just more candid? So you know, it was fascinating to see, to hear, you know, like the way that Aisha was you know, kind of bringing that in. So what do we kind of see those different, I don't know, I guess, you know, different octaves, not that I really understand the musicality of it, but the idea of when do you kind of fall into that other voice? and when do we see it, and when do we need to see it? So I think it feels like that's something that the actors really, kind of pick up on. And when we're writing, we're trying to pick up on it too. When are they telling the truth? When they're saying, or what are they kind of withholding, so that we know if something's a euphemism or not. So, you can kind of hear what's being said and what's being kind of held back at the same time. It's almost like two voices at once, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Oh,
go ahead, Alan.
No. I guess I think we can, see people still thinking on that. So
I
okay.
have as I'm writing, I see it and I hear everyone, and I have, Ibrahim as a child, so he's 6 years old, right? And so there's sort of children's, as I've learned through all of my research and listening to children, they speak to a different rhythm as adults, right? And I found that it's pretty consistent. Even I listen, when I'm in France or traveling, I would listen to French kids, little children, and that rhythm is there, even in a different language. And I'm fascinated with the interpretation of Marabou Ahmed, right? So the actor who read the audiobook is from Mauritania, and he's like fluent in English and Arabic and Wolof and French. And his interpretation and Asha's interpretation of Ahmed is similar, but also very different. And I just find it fascinating how everyone has an interpretation of the antagonist that is very, very specific to their translation, but that translation is still similar across the board, where the audiobook reader was like, he really leaned into Ahmed in a way that I was like, whoa, like I didn't even expect. And Asha's interpretation was, I think closer to what I heard when I was writing Ahmed. So that was really fascinating.
Okay. Dolan?
I really loved what Ravi said in answer to this question about thinking about when a character slips out of their sort of professional voice, or as I might term it, when they stop sort of holding back, when all of the sort of polite constraints break down, and then they say what they really mean and what they really think. I love that, especially when I think about in the Black context, right? We talk differently than WASP culture and WASP dialogue. And so I'm very interested in that, right? Like how we communicate different culturally. And I think one of the burdens of literary fiction on many Black writers is that literary fiction is, and I don't think we talk about this often enough, is construed around WASP culture and around like WASP communication styles, when in fact Black people don't talk like that. And if we don't talk like that, then our fiction doesn't sound like that. And not just with dialogue, but just in general, like the voice of our fiction. This is something Zora Neale Hurston was trying to tell us, I mean, maybe even Charles Chestnut before her was trying to tell us, like, don't get caught up in that. Instead, represent your people's voicing. So when I think about like this, how my characters sound, I'm often thinking like, how Black people sound, and trying to capture that, and not getting too caught up in, what I learned in fiction workshop,
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I want to get this question in from Khadijah. So she says, all of these books have an element of awareness building where the reader is learning about some historical truths. So she wants, each author, if possible, to talk about, do you have hopes about your book making social impact?
So Alan, I think you froze for a second. So could you finish?
Oh, sorry. Okay. So Khadijah's question to the authors is, do you have hopes about your book making social impact? And if so, what ways?
I don't mind jumping in because this has always been at the forefront of my mind while I was writing the book. So No Heaven for Good Boys, although fiction, I like to say the house, the scaffolding of the book is nonfiction. So the Taliban are real boys in Senegal in this human rights crisis. And, you know, I write the book as third person, but I write it in present tense because these children are still in this situation today. And to write it as past tense, as if it's something that's happened and doesn't exist anymore, I didn't feel was honoring their suffering and where they are in the world. And so the point of the book is to bring their story to a larger platform to support Senegalese people who are doing the really hard work on the ground in terms of activism and advocating for these boys to get this tradition that's being abused, to get some sort of change for them. And when I was living in Senegal and left in 2008, I didn't think that 12 years later, the boys would still be in that situation. I thought like the book would come out and it would be past tense. So my hope is, you know, I'm not a savior. Like people in other parts of the world don't need Americans to come and save them because we can barely save ourselves. But the book exists as another level or another layer of support for what's happening on the ground in Senegal for the children and for those, you know, doing that work. So I do hope so.
I think for me, as far as social impact, a lot of my, I started writing, I was a journalist before I became a fiction writer. So a lot of my work starts in the archive, but what I also notice is that, you know, the news cycle tends to be a little bit shorter for stories about Black folks. We kind of disappear from the front page so quickly. So I became really interested in what was going on with some of these issues, like between headlines, or kind of in the lives of the people who were affected, you know, maybe a day, you know, weeks later when they're not being asked about the situation. So like a lot of aftermath I was really interested in, like writing about the aftermath of a lynching or the aftermath of Nat King Cole getting attacked on stage, or this story that's about kind of the aftermath of this decision about, you know, the way that people feel about the death penalty. You might see a headline about someone was killed, you know, by lethal injection this day at this time, and then that's it, you know, and then they move on to the next one the next time. So I wanted to find a different way, especially those voices that aren't necessarily reflected in the news or people who don't get asked about stories as much. So imagine them kind of telling the story. So maybe if there's any social impact to show that, how fiction, creative nonfiction, poetry, you know, playwrights, anybody who's kind of taking some of these issues on, you're almost kind of extending the news cycle and more, you know, kind of in a creative way to kind of, you know, take up that question again.
I'll just, you know, briefly add that, you know, I have two minds on this question. Like on the one hand, I'm like, can we really make a difference as artists? You know, we're not policymakers, we're not making the laws, we're not sentencing people, changing people's lives in really direct ways. We are not, you know, lawyers. But I also understand the power of art too, and the way in which it can shape attitudes and consciousness and hearts, and it can reach people in a way that other things never can, right? Like I really love the Freedom Reads project that you know, will put books into prison systems, because I think, you know, books can change lives. And, you know, I really am hopeful that literature can make a difference. But I have two minds. I will say that, like, historically, Black artists fully and wholeheartedly believed in the power of art. And our art is born, African-American art is born out of a political tradition. They were not ambivalent in that regard, and they had no sort of second thoughts about that. And to the extent I consider myself a descendant of that tradition, absolutely, I am a political writer.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So I am going to bring on Hurston-Wright's Executive Director, Khadijah Ali Coleman, to close us out. So Khadijah.
Hi, everybody. So I wanted to jump on can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Awesome. So I'm having a little technical, I'm freezing and all kinds of craziness, but I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out. And of course, I wanted to say special thank you to Derrick and Alan for doing an amazing job hosting yet our second Words of Color. I wanted to also thank Danielle Watson, who is our program associate, for coordinating another episode of Words of Color. And I do want to give a shout out to all of the authors. Thank you. First of all, before I get to the authors, I want to thank the actors for an amazing presentation of this phenomenal work. But I also want to just let you know that these authors tonight, Ravi Howard, Dolen Perkins-Valdez, Keisha Bush, have a special relationship with Hurston-Wright. We are immensely grateful year after year that we have these successful writers who have some kind of tentacles, connection to Hurston-Wright, coming back to share their brilliance with writers. And this year, Ravi Howard and Keisha Bush are teachers, are instructors in our Writers Week and Writers Weekend. Keisha Bush just finished. We are working on Mama Keisha. Keisha was just with us, and you can go on Twitter and see all the folks just raving about being in Keisha Bush's fiction writing workshop this past weekend with our virtual Writers weekend that just ended on Sunday. Then Ravi is going to be teaching at Howard University for Writers Week that starts at the end of July. And Dolen Perkins-Valdez was an instructor. You've done a lot of things with us, right? Did you teach last year? I think you were in a session as well. I know we had a reading that you did, but both Ravi and Dolan have also come through Hurston-Wright workshops. So it's just a family affair. And I just think that it's a testament to how important these spaces for Black writers are. And so I wanted to jump on and just say thank you. Thank you for sharing your craft with us. Thank you for being accessible. And for everyone who had a part in tonight, I just think that you just are such a testament to how these small gatherings still matter. And I appreciate you still coming back to Hurston-Wright. For everyone and thank you, the audience, who took time out on Thursday to tune in, to hear new work. Hopefully, if you haven't purchased the books by these authors, that you go and you get these books, whether you get on your Kindle, whether you order them, from, we won't drop names of where you need to order, but of course, always support Black bookstores if you get a chance, right? Check out the websites of all of these authors, including our hosts are writers as well. Alan King and Derrick Weston Brown are phenomenal poets, and both of them have relationships with Hurston-Wright that extend beyond being hosts for this wonderful event. But everybody in the audience, please stay connected, and you can learn more about Hurston-Wright by visiting us online at hurstonwright.org. Thank you so much for coming out, and we appreciate you.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, authors. Thank you, audience. Thank you, actors. Right.
Thank you, Derrick and Alan.
Oh, thank y'all.
And Asha, Aisha, and Camille, Dolan and Ravi, and everyone for joining us. This was amazing.
Mhm.